Hello and welcome back to the Honest Business Podcast. I hope you are very well. And whenever you are watching this, hope you're having a good week. Today, we are talking about the biggest mistake successful business owners make. This is such a good episode. Please listen to the end. I think this is going to really help you. And I don't know, you might identify, you might not. But I think a lot of people talk about things that people are making mistakes when they're not successful. But actually, I work with really successful people who are doing amazing things and doing amazing things in business. And but they also make mistakes and they struggle and they are always working through things. And what we're going to talk about today is arguably, I would suggest, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, mistakes that come up. So let's dive into it, and you can hear a lot of insight and maybe kind of work through whether or not this is you. So to sum up the mistake, it essentially is giving your power away. So what I mean by that is, I would ask you the question, where are you giving away your power? Now, when we talk about power, what I mean is your internal compass, your internal ability to deliver, your internal get up and go. This is the thing that people are running short of and they give away and they struggle with. So it's, where are you giving your power away? I am not talking about physical like power. I'm not talking about your leverage with someone. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about your internal compass and the get up and go and the drive that you have and your energetic kind of relatability. I'm talking about that. So this is going to be an interesting conversation, and I'm going to talk you through just a really open conversation for you to think about things. This isn't about us finding loads of things out. It's not about us like delving into X, Y, and Z solution. This is about, let's just talk about this and hear me out and kind of let yourself think on this. This is more of a thinking activity. I think journaling on this would be good. So if you want to get pen and paper and you want to kind of work through this episode and think about what comes up when I'm talking, that would be a good option. So we're going to talk about what it looks like and how you may feel. We're going to talk about when to do something about it. And then, we're just going to kind of we'll have a brief, light conversation. And I'm going to cover things about what it looks like with yourself, with your clients, with potential clients, with your team, and with your competitors and wider community. So I'm really going to go into depth here for us to kind of pick up on things. Now, I'm not going to cover everything, but I'm going to try and pick up on some key things that might help you identify this. So when we think about what does this look like, I'm going to just briefly do an overarching thing, and then we're going to talk about when to do something about it, and then we're going to go into the individual topics. So what happens is, when you start giving your power away, you essentially stagnate. Now, I'm not saying the business stagnates. I'm saying you as an individual can stagnate, and you can feel like you get into a slump, in a rut, in a downward spiral. You can feel like you fall out of love in your business. You could feel like you're a bit like flat. There's so many different ways that can kind of come up for you as an individual. However, the knock-on effect and issue for that in the business, and why it is the biggest mistake that successful business owners make, is for these reasons. Once you start giving your power away, and once you just push and push and push, and then that's kind of like you're empty, you stop evolving. And when you stop evolving, there is all sorts of issues that come up because you stop innovating. And we know that if you want long-term success over a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year, 40-year, beyond period of time, innovation and evolving is important. It's key. Yeah? It's so, so important. Now, one of the reasons that happens is because you disconnect. And you disconnect from a really strong internal compass. And if you're listening to this, I'm kind of holding my chest here because it is something that you're going to feel, right? You're going to feel this heaviness. And you feel it because some people will feel drained. Not everybody, but some people will feel drained. And what's important to understand here is, right, you can make this mistake, but it can be on a spectrum. This isn't like you've either gave your power away or you haven't. Every day we're giving our energy away, we're giving power away, we're giving kind of our forcefulness away. That's okay, that's life. What this is about is understanding where are you at on the scale and how much of it are you giving away, and where can you make some changes, or where do you want to make movements in moving things forward from where you're at right now. Some of you are listening to this, you might be literally on the floor and thinking, I can't do this anymore. It's really, really hard. I'm really struggling. Others of you will be like, no, I'm feeling good. The team's growing, business is growing, everything's really good. But then when I go through the examples, you're going to like feel like, yeah, actually, do you know what? I am giving my power away. Where can I find some kind of innovation for this? And where can I look at going deeper into something? So the disconnect happens, and then what the next thing happens from that is you struggle with risk taking. So you then go on this journey of, ultimately, entrepreneurship is about taking risk, yeah? And some of you will be very risk averse and some of you will not be, and that's fine, right? You build your business how you want to. There's no right or wrong. But the risk taking will start to be difficult because you will struggle to come to conclusions. Sometimes your whole decision-making process will be short, and your executive functioning around decision-making will also be really, really hard. And so you will find that all of a sudden, just making the simplest decision can be like, whoa, I don't know what I'm doing here. Struggling with that one. Don't know, not sure. I don't want to make a decision. Don't want to sit in that. Don't want to deal with it. Sometimes you won't even want to have the conversation with someone if it's about a decision. And that is really difficult because it starts to make your role as a business, as a leader, as someone who is driving a movement forward, some people would feel impossible, but most people would find difficult. And then what happens from that is you become complacent. And so complacency becomes very high. And you begin to just be like, there's just too much. And you feel very heavy, very overwhelmed. And this can happen if there's just a business of one of you, and maybe you make a load of money that way. Maybe you don't make a lot of money, and that's totally cool as well. Or maybe you have a really big team and you do lots of cool things and the business is going perfectly well and everything's going right? Your growth plan's working, your strategy that you're following's working, you're sticking to your planning, it's all working out, everything should be great, everybody's la-di-da, you've got loads of money. Like, this is a situation that happens for people across the board, right? This isn't about money, it's not about kind of where you're at in business necessarily. Although people who are having a really successful time particularly struggle with this, it's just you're at this point where you're just like, I can't be bothered. Complacency's high. Now, what I want to clarify on here is some of the things I'm talking about, you are going to be in your head thinking, well, is this not burnout? And those are two different things. Can you give your power away and then end up burnt out? Yes. Can you be in burnout and be struggling with boundaries and therefore give your power away? Yes. Is giving your power away and burnout the same thing? No. Can you have one without the other? 100% yes. Can they both be together? Yes. This is a fluid conversation that I want to uncover, and this isn't the same conversation we would have if we were talking about burnout. And I just want to make that clear because it's important, yeah? You do need to understand if you're suffering burnout because that's a different ideology, it's a different process, it's a different kind of strategy around how do you manage that. This is about where are you giving your power away day to day in your business, week to week, month to month, where is it not kind of all gelling together? So that is the kind of picture of what happens and why that's an issue. I now want to think about, for you to understand, when do you do something about it? The biggest issue most people have is they can't identify it in themselves, and so they just can't, they don't even know they're in it. So some of you, when you're listening to this, might realise, God, for 2 years I've been in this, or for 6 months, or for a week, or this just like, you might listen to this and think, this is totally summing up where I'm at. The biggest problem is rather than knowing when to do something about it, is actually identifying it in the first place. In terms of doing something about it, you can make really instantaneous changes and it can be quick. So this is the fun part, right? It doesn't have to be this long drawn out thing. You can start making changes that will impact you and really help you literally after listening to this podcast. Like, you can go and do things straight away, which I really like. And I think is a really positive move because, you know, a lot of things sometimes feels like everything takes ages. This doesn't have to. But when you need to do something about it is at the point in which it starts affecting your business, which what we've just discussed about not innovating, not evolving, you know, disconnecting, struggle with decision making, that is going to make your life really difficult and then can make you start losing interest in business and in whatever your plans are for the business. So you kind of want to do something about it pretty quick, but you also have to sometimes give yourself permission to take a step back and just assess. So for some people, you're going to need a period of a week or 2 weeks or a month where you're like, actually, I just want to work out why I'm feeling like this, or what has led to this, or how I'm kind of situated, and what does this mean? And so giving yourself permission to allow yourself to do that is important. You don't have to go in guns blazing making a change. But for some of you, it will be obvious of like, yeah, actually, I do need to make a change because that's just not working. And then you need to work out what is next. Because a lot of this is about not going back to same behavior or similar behavior. Because for some of you, ultimately when you give your power away, it's a behavioral decision. It's not a conscious one sometimes, but you are doing something that does that. And therefore the behavior needs to change and needs to evolve. This is ultimately a discussion in self-leadership and in emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence development stems from this, and this is what we're talking about, which is why you need to listen to this episode, and you should be listening to it all the way through, which I know some of you, the fact I've said that, are now going to switch off. But stick with me. Please stick with me. If you're serious about, your development, this is the kind of stuff we need to be talking about, and we need to sit in the uncomfortability of and think about and really openly, remove the cover from us and say, where are we at with this? What does this mean? So I am now going to go through the different areas that I identified earlier, and I'm going to give you some examples of where you may be giving your power away and what that looks like, so you can start identifying what this means and what it means to you. So overall, in terms of with yourself, so how are you giving power away within yourself? Here are some kind of key indicators that you will potentially resonate with. The biggest one tends to be that you're working too much and you've got zero work-life balance. Now, this can swing the other way if you've been giving your power away for years and years. It might be that you're seriously disconnected and you can't get anything done and your procrastination's really low. But for a lot of people, if you're a successful business owner, you're a high achiever, you're making a lot happen, you're likely going at 100 miles an hour and you're working loads and loads and loads, and you don't really have a very good work-life balance. Your boundaries are all shot. You haven't really, kept up with what you said you were going to do, and you've neglected your kind of personal needs and personal wants and desires. That is when you've really given your power away and you're like, yeah, this is completely all gone to pot. The other thing that it can show up as, and again, this is not that you have to have all of these are just ones that you might have something, you might not, is perfectionism. Perfectionism comes into play in this, and it shouts really loud, and so you can feel overcome with overwhelm in terms of perfectionism and feeling like everything needs to be right and done in order for anything to happen. Another interesting one to look at is a disconnect with any coaching containers or mentoring or advisory services or anything where, you've paid to work with someone and then you feel disconnected to them. You feel like, oh, I'm not really getting as much as I used to get out of them. Or you feel like, oh, I don't know if this is really for me. And obviously that might be the container. So I'm not saying that is definitely that you're giving your power away. But what it can be is that when you've allowed someone or something or a situation to just kind of give yourself to everything to yourself, and then you kind of left everything else, and you're kind of in this shell of a body and feel like you're like, oh, I just don't know what I'm doing here. You then disconnect from the support measures that you've put in place. So this could even be therapy, where you kind of then just disconnect and you're like, oh, well, this doesn't work and I don't want to do this. And it becomes quite erratic. And that is often because you're out of alignment and you've given away, or you've actively given away so much of yourself and your power that you don't take that back inside of you. And then therefore you go on self-destruct and self-sabotage because you're just like, well, this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work. I often find people who are in this point, when I make suggestions on things, will immediately find reasons that it's not going to work, or immediately hit back at this, but this, but this, but this, but this. And not all the time, obviously. Some people are saying that because it needs to be, but some people are saying that because they've given so much power away that they haven't quite regained that for themselves, and they're not able to make that connection. Another thing could be that you're lacking commitment and you're unable to keep your word. So if you're someone who normally, or in a past time, was great, you committed to everything, you showed up, if you said you were going to do something, you did it, and then all of a sudden you're not, That can be a key reason of, wow, I've really given my power away to XYZ person, XYZ situation, XYZ thing. You lack this like drive of, yes, I'm going to be able to do this. And it becomes more of a like, oh, have I really got to do this? Or, oh, I don't really want to do it. Or you half-ass things. Yeah, you're like, that'll do. Whereas for you, your normal approach was never that. And this can happen from a slow approach. So it might be that you've been doing this slowly over like a 6-month period. For some people, you might think, God, I've been in this for 3 years. Some of you will be maybe just got there this week. It's all relevant and it's all relative. So you can kind of pick up what sits for you. Now, when we move over to clients, there's a big kind of, clients can be a hard one, right? If you're going through this, because it can feel like everything's really hard and you might feel like you resent them. So for some people, you'll start resenting clients, especially if people are demanding or you've got the wrong type of clients. You've then given all your power away to them and they're just wanting, and you've given them away and then you resent them because you're like, oh God, I don't want to work with them. It might be that when they send a message or an email, you're like, oh, I don't want to look at it. And they don't even, you put off opening it, or you open it and don't want to respond. And it feels energetically stuck. It feels like there's something like a barrier there. That to me, red flag massively of you have given your power away. I'm not saying that they're not a bad client. I'm not saying that they haven't got their own issues. What I'm saying is you as the person with the client has a responsibility to manage that to some degree, and you manage how you deliver and what you give to them. And often it's a sign of we've given our power away, and therefore all of the other tools we had in our toolkit have kind of just been left at the wayside, and we are just kind of allowing the client to do whatever they want. So the next step of that is often a leaky boundary. Often we have this set of boundaries that we hold, and then all of a sudden it starts leaking and we start kind of just letting things come on top, and we say yes to that one thing and that small thing. That in itself gives your power away, yeah? You're giving yourself, you're diluting your power and saying, oh yeah, you can have this and you can have that and you can have this, and we didn't agree on that, but that's fine because I want to keep you happy because I feel insecure because we're on this cycle of, giving the power away. That in itself is something that we have to try and stop and try and say, no, this is not helping us. The other thing I've seen this show up for people is actually apologizing for things. So for some people, when they're giving their power away, they're giving it away via apologizing for things they don't need to apologize for. So if you need to apologize for something, obviously apologize. I am not one of these people who's like, oh, you shouldn't apologize. Like, I disagree with that. If you make a mistake, you apologize. And I feel really strongly about that. However, what I have seen happen is that people who are very professional and are very apt in what they do then start apologizing for things that they don't need to, but it's because they've given their power away to their client, and the client is like, they're just taking whatever they want, which doesn't help them in the long run, although they might believe it does, and is really not helping you as the business owner. This is where imposter syndrome comes in, yeah? Because you're like, on one hand, I've got this thriving business, everything's going well, everything's amazing, and behind the scenes, you feel like it's falling apart, you feel really difficult, you feel like the client's really pulling you, you feel like, oh, I don't know what to do, even though you know what to do, but in your head, you can't actually physically make it happen for yourself. It's a whole massive, horrendous ball game, and you're like, oh, I just don't know what to do. And there becomes a breaking point. Yeah, there becomes a breaking point where you're like, I can't do this, or this is too much, or this is hard, or something needs to change. At that point, you've just given so much of your power away. And then this is where your leadership needs to come in, and your self-leadership and your guidance. And that's why having a support system is really important. But ultimately, this is examples of where you're giving your power away. I really hope this is like resonating, as much as I don't want you to feel like you are giving your power away. It's very likely that you are, because we all are to some degree. I would really argue and I'd urge you to kind of think about this as a spectrum and not as this like, yes, I am or no, I'm not, because reality of it is we're all doing this in a small degree or a large degree at all times to some extent, and that's okay. It's not about, none of this is about removing it completely, because that's somewhat impossible. It's just about being aware and being self-aware enough to say, okay, that is what I'm identifying, this is why I feel like this is what I can do as a kind of preventative measure, or this is what I can do as a solution. That's a really key aspect. Next up, potential leads. So when you are dealing with potential leads, you might do these things when you're giving your power away. So you might completely detach from them. So sometimes people have like loads of leads and they just don't contact them, they don't get back to them, or they just like are just not inspired to. Like, they've maybe done loads of work because they wanted to get leads and they were like, lead generation's a problem. And then they have got loads of leads and they don't want to action them. They don't want to, like, there's just something in them that's like, oh, I just don't want to deal with them. Can't be bothered. And then, or you don't follow up. You just start not following up. Maybe you're someone who does follow up and that's part of your sales strategy. And then you just don't. And you're like, ugh. And you're like, I can't be bothered. Now, for some of you, not following up is okay. Like, for some of you, that will make sense. But for others of you, that's a key part of your conversion and will add a massive amount of, people into your business by following up. And so when you don't, that makes a huge impact to your bottom line. The other thing that comes up when you give your power away is that you just don't want to sell. You just don't want to sell, or when you do sell, it feels weird. And there's just this energetic block there. And you're like, this just doesn't feel right. And when that's the case, it's often because you've given your power away to ideals, to stereotypes, to what people believe or perceive of you and what you think people are thinking about you. And that can then make selling really difficult. And some of you, it'll be like, you've worked really hard, you've created this amazing business, but there's just something that is not quite right and feels really difficult. And so the sales part just gets lost. Because for some of you, you'll have built a business on referrals, or you'll have built a business where you haven't actively had to go out that much and find X, Y, and Z client. And now you might be at a point of that because you're scaling, and so that you've had to introduce other client acquisition methods into your business. And therefore, that is then what's flagged up this idea of, whoa, I'm giving my power away in this area, or this area, this area. Important to note, if it's highlighted to you in an example I've said, it's not necessarily that you're giving your power away in that specific area. It might just be that it's a symptom of a different action. Some of you, it will be linked. So for some of you, it'll be like you're, you resent what you're offering because the container itself is too low priced for the amount of output it is. So therefore, you're giving your power away in that sense, and therefore you don't want to sell it. That's like a straight connection. Some things it won't be. Some things it will just be that it comes up. But then that's a byproduct of something else, which is why working with someone like me can kind of come and uncover this for you, and that's not an instant process, but it's something that you can work on and learn, your behavior and work on your leadership and really uncover what does that look like. And that kind of really is the crux of when you start to fully being able to lead yourself, because it's a learned behavior to some degree. The other thing that you might start doing is creating bespoke packages when it isn't part of your business model. So for some of you, when you're selling with potential leads, bespoke packages is part of your business model. But for a lot of people, it won't be. You'll have like services, and those services are packaged, and that's that. And then what happens is when you give your power away, that is an act of giving your power away by saying to someone, that's okay, I'll put this package together for you, and it's at this price, and you've immediately just completely thrown your power away because you're like, okay, like, yeah, we'll do whatever you want. And inside of you that feels so difficult, and it might feel like, oh, I just don't want to do that, and I shouldn't have done it. And you come off the call and you're like, oh man, why did I do that? Or you send a proposal and you're like, I'm sending this proposal and I know I shouldn't do that, but I'm going to do it anyway. That is when you give your power away, and then there's just this like emptiness, and you're like, oh, and even if you sign the client, you're not even that bothered because you're like, Some of you, it's a positive experience, but you're still giving your power away. So it's not a completely negative experience. For some of you, it's like, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do bespoke like things because it's really fun, and I've got this really cool client, and it's a dream client, and I want to work with them for ages, and they want to do this, and I'm happy to do that. But you're still giving your power away. And therefore, the negative impact of what happens, what we discussed about at the top of this episode, still come into play months down the line, weeks down the line, days down the line. And it's sitting there and presenting itself in a positive situation, which is where this gets difficult. And this is where emotional intelligence comes in, because you have to seriously start thinking and understanding about why you make decisions and why you process and feel the way you do. And also learning to understand the different emotions of how do they present themselves in the same way, but they can be two separate emotions, one negative, one positive, which is always an interesting place to be. So moving on from potential leads, because as I say, I'm trying to just keep to like a few, because it could be a long one otherwise. With your team. Now, Team is one of the biggest players in this giving your power away. And when I talk about really successful business owners giving their power away, often the team thing is actually the biggest one. So if you have a team, listen up, because this might be where you're feeling like, yep, this is me. So the biggest thing that happens is people stop holding people accountable. So team members just aren't held accountable because you've just like given your power away and you just let them roam free, and you're like, oh, you've had a really busy time, or there's this happened, or, you know, someone's unhappy about a certain process that you want to put in the business. And then you make things worse by not holding them accountable, and you just let them do whatever the hell they want. That in itself is a complete recipe for disaster, but also is a complete recipe for disaster from your energetic management and from your self-leadership. The other thing that's a massive one is saying that you want to have a high-performing team, or saying you do have a high-performing team, but then you won't say something when something is wrong, or you're unhappy about something, or you don't like the way something's been done, or it's not correct, it's just damn right wrong. You just don't say anything. That in itself is giving your power away, but it's also a manifestation tool of how it lives in a business for years and years and years, and how you end up with a team 5 years, 10 years down the line that is so dysfunctional and is not productive in the slightest. Now, this is hard, yeah? Because how many of your top performers and best salespeople, best, team leaders are the people who do something that you want to say, actually, that's not right, or we need to change that, or actually, can you do it this way? But you don't. That in itself there is a massive indicator for me and says you have to work on that. It is not enough for you to say, let it pass one time, I only execute on the third time. The third time, it's too late in most businesses, depending on what the team issue is. And when you start just letting things go, the power's gone, right? You give your power away yourself. You're almost like acting in a body that you're not feeling control of. You think in your head you're in control of, but in terms of your subconscious, it's just already going a million miles an hour beyond that, because you haven't. You're not staying in alignment with what you know to be true and what you stated that you wanted. The other way it can show up in your team is micromanaging. Now, I don't talk about a lot of micromanaging, although I have a lot to say on it, because it's a complex one where people have got various opinions on it. However, the general consensus in 2023 is that micromanaging isn't good. Okay? Well, let's just put it with that. That's fair enough to say. When you've given your power away, you then start trying to reclaim power in other areas and kind of reclaim some kind of certainty. And what happens there is you go down the route of micromanagement. Because it's like, well, if I micromanage people, then I don't have to have the difficult conversation. I don't have to have the conversation that I actually need to have that would be much more productive. Instead, I'm just going to micromanage everyone. That in itself is like horrific in terms of giving power away and in terms of your development as a leader. It's really, really challenging. It's not fair on your team. It's not fair on you. It becomes this whole difficult palaver. But ultimately, the micromanaging is a real issue and is an element of where you're giving your power away. The other thing to note here is when you then stop giving responsibility of tasks away, or you start reclaiming them for yourself. So what that looks like is, when we talk about successful teams and how they flow and what's the best option and how do we run a successful team, many people will talk to you about this idea of giving people responsibility versus people giving people tasks. 100% makes total sense. Yeah, give somebody that they are responsible for this thing so that they need to get X, Y, and Z thing done versus, just do this one task to me and that adds to a wider project. What then happens is when you start giving your power away, you don't give them the responsibility. You just give them this kind of like wishy-washy expectation that doesn't really work. And some people won't give them tasks, but they just still don't really they're not really helping them. They're still just kind of like, it's basically like when you're in the middle. So you're like half micromanaging, half kind of giving them responsibility, but not really. And then that makes it really horrendous for the people who are in your team. Like really, really bad. It's not good. But you are doing it because you're allowing yourself to give the power away and say, well, this thing's happening, that thing's happening, and blah, blah, blah. Like, it doesn't matter. Nobody's really interested in whatever difficulty thing you're dealing with, because everybody's dealing with something. And then you give your power away, and it really hurts the team. Like, it can be really, really hard to pull that back around, and it can take a lot of time. The team aspect I can go into a lot more, because the team stuff we really see a lot, but I don't want to I think that should have given you a kind of good perspective of potential things and how they would come up. The final kind of element and section of people to look at of how you could be giving your power away comes from you with your competitors and your wider community. Now, this is the one that I would say is sometimes the hardest to identify and the most common, especially if you're just really successful and you're having a good time and you're enjoying yourself. And I know that I've made it a bit negative maybe this episode in terms of like when I'm discussing the things, but it's just kind of to try and I wanted to try and make it really clear for you to identify, because there's a whole host of like positive things that I could talk about, but it's more difficult for you to self-identify with. And it's easier to do on a one-on-one kind of capacity of us identifying something, which I'm more than happy to do with people if you want to do this piece of work together. But when we talk about competitors and wider community, where this can come up is hiding. Some people will just hide. They don't want to be present. They don't want to be visible. They don't want to like make a fuss. They just want to kind of stay in the lane, keep going, keep the business moving. Not going to do loads of marketing. We're going to let the marketing team, if you've got a marketing team, like do stuff, but it's not really that aligned with the business. It's just kind of like stuff, filler stuff. You kind of hide and retract and kind of go inwards. That in itself, you've given your power away. You're letting someone else have a narrative, letting someone else have a voice because you feel like your voice is not refined enough, good enough, hasn't got something to say, isn't strong enough, which is all rubbish, right? But that's what you're kind of in the space of. The other thing is not sharing achievements. That's a huge one. So for people who are at the multi-6-figure, 7-figure, 8-figure mark, there becomes this retreat of, I'm not going to share my achievements because it's going to offend someone, or someone's going to have something to say, or it's going to be really difficult. Can I just say, like, I totally get this. So I totally resonate with a lot of this. I'm trying not to use my personal disclosure in this because I don't want it to veer you off track. Trying to keep it really focused, the conversation, because I know sometimes these conversations can end up really, really long, but this is so normal. So if you're sat there thinking, this is me, that's okay, right? It's normal. It's just there's lots of things we can do to help you move forward from it and kind of limit it. It's not about completely getting rid of it. But this idea of not sharing achievements is a massive way that successful business owners give their power away. Hugely, hugely. The other thing, a practical one might be, you don't say what you truly want to say. So you have a narrative in your head, you have something you want to say, but then you feel like it has to be toned down or changed or monitored or kind of reassessed to fit in with the narrative of whatever your industry is saying. So it might be industry related. It might be that you have a strong opinion about that and you can't say that because you just think X, Y, and Z thing might happen. That in itself is an example of you giving your power away, of just letting it roll away from you. You're not claiming it. You're not taking self-responsibility. You're not owning it. And yes, that has to be done in a way that is thoughtful and that is fine and is, not unpleasant. But you have something to say. And if you have something to say, then you got to say it. And when you don't, that really doesn't help. It really causes problems. The other thing to say with that about the competitors in the wider community is that is one of the easiest ones to fix, I would say, and it's the one that's most popular, and it's the one that causes kind of issues a lot of the time, because it's the one that people will refuse, even though it's easy to fix, or easier to fix than others. It's the thing that people will not fix and will like put off and put off and put off. And that's because it's deep rooted, yeah, and it's really a personal work around often as to why you've gotten there in the first place. But giving your power away is so detrimental to your business. And I'm not saying that you can't you shouldn't ever, because inevitably we do every day, we're all doing it, but there's elements where it can get chronically bad and where it can seriously impact a business. And what I have seen is like people can go from being a thriving business owner, and then over time this really eats away at them, and it gets to the point where they then just on a self-sabotage absolute mission and just go crazy and just start like just doing mad things that is not helpful for their business in the slightest, and is really detrimental to their success and their vision and what their plan is and where they're supposed to be going. But I do not want to leave you on a negative note. So I want to just go through what is possible on the other side of this and kind of what the kind of alternative is. So in terms of finding solutions for all of the things and understanding how you move forward from giving your power away, I don't feel like it's personally responsible to reel off to you loads of things to do, because it isn't fair without understanding your situation. Personally, I feel you might be able to find content out there that tells you otherwise, and that's fine. But I just feel personally like from being a safe practitioner, if you want to call us that, or just like taking responsibility for it, it's important to, it just becomes too much of a personal discussion, not about me, but I just mean in terms of other people, to try and delve into that, because there's about 100 different solutions to each specific point. But what I want to kind of just relay to you is there is a side to this, that the other side of it is you can have the freedom, you can have the space, you can feel really expansive and empowered. This is about empowerment, yeah? And it's about confidence. And you can take massive amounts of ownership and feel huge expansion and feel in this space of abundance whilst difficult things are happening in your business, whilst challenging things are happening, all at the same time. That is what we ultimately want. And as I mentioned, it is not that you're never ever going to give your power away, because we're all going to do that all the time. But it's about you being conscious of it, you understanding it, and then ultimately being able to see like, okay, I can grapple with these two concepts at once, and I can sit in that and really think about that and be like, whoa, yeah, I get this now. I understand this. This is making sense to me. Because the more you start understanding yourself and you go on this journey of improving your emotional intelligence, being able to lead yourself, business becomes easier. This is the key to sustainable business growth. Strategy is important. Of course it is. I'm a strategy consultant. You know me. You know that I will die on the hill of how important strategy is. But this bit about management and leadership is so important, and is where my work really gels together, because you giving your power away can eat away at every single bit of you, every single bit of your being, every single bit of your ambition, every single bit of your drive, and it can leave you feel like an absolute heap on the floor. And if you're there, that's okay. Things will change. You can move forward. Do not feel like this is like it and that you're going to be like that forever. But also understand that in order for this to move on, you're the one that has to do something about it. This is not a story in getting other people to change, which is what the immediate thing is. For a lot of people, it's a defensive wall that comes up and they want to just blame everyone. This isn't a blame. It's about taking ownership. It's about understanding what works for you and your specific personality type, your specific goals as a business owner, your specific set of personal kind of boundaries and your own kind of needs as a business owner, and taking that into account. So please, please, please use this episode and identify what that looks like for you and build a picture. And then start thinking about, okay, where have I lost things along the way? Where have I lost my way with that? Where can I implement a boundary? A lot of the solution is around boundaries. A lot of it is about understanding your needs. So it's about listing your needs, listing your boundaries, and then creating kind of checkpoints for you to avoid going into this in the future. But I hope that this conversation has kind of raised something for you today and has allowed you to explore something that maybe you've not really thought much about or you haven't ever gone into a depth with. And I hope that this can kind of bring you a real balanced approach to looking at where do you give your power away and how do you reclaim that somewhat. And as I say, you are listening to this, you're probably a really successful business owner. You might have made a hell of a lot of money. You probably run a great business. You have a fantastic product or service. You've got a great team. this is the next part of your journey. This is the next step in your development as a leader. You might have been in business 10 years, 20 years. This is like taking time to get there, and that's okay. It's okay for you to have had to have that previous time that you've had to get to this point, and you found this episode and you've uncovered this conversation. Now there's a period of let's do some work around that. And you can go on that journey on yourself. You can go on that with someone else. You can go on that with me if you want. If you've related to this episode and you've listened to this and actually you're like, do you know what? This is screaming at me of like, this is where I'm at. I am more than happy to have a conversation with you if you want to come and work with me. This is the kind of deep stuff we do working with me one-on-one in one-on-one consulting. That is a 6-month package, and that is where we have the time and the space and the resources and the kind of breathing capacity to do this deep work that isn't necessarily like strategy based or focused around X, Y, and Z goal. It's about you and you as the business owner, the CEO, the director, the MD, whatever your title is. You ultimately know that you are so responsible for making shit happen and for being able to guide a vision and a mission. But if you're struggling with this right now and grappling with loads of concepts in there that we've discussed today, I would argue the investment in yourself has to happen. It's a non-negotiable. I'm not saying it has to be with me, although I would recommend me. It has to happen because you can't continue like this. And, you know, many people will try and do it for years and years, and then ultimately there becomes this big breaking point sometimes. And I don't want you to get to the breaking point. And I'm not saying you will get there. Some people manage to, you know, never get there. But you have to make a conscious decision to be like, yeah, do you know what? This is something I need to do and is a worthy investment for me to go on this journey of doing this piece of work. And it is something that you will get to know yourself much more thoroughly. And it will impact all areas of your life, right? We've talked about business today, but it can go way beyond that. It's not just about business. This is applicable to your life and to all aspects of your life. But I think it's a really rewarding journey to go on, because at the point in which you start reclaiming your power, magical things happen. The innovation that comes from that is incredible. The clarity that comes from that is amazing. The inspiration that you exude to people and the people that like attach onto is amazing. You become quite magnetic a lot of the time. People who are really don't give their power away are so magnetic, and people want to be around them, and people are inquisitive and they're like, whoa, what is going on here? Like, I want more of this. And a lot of you need that for your team. You need that in yourself. You want that for your potential clients. Like, it's a win-win all around, but it comes from you deciding to commit to do a piece of work and to really kind of go all in. And that doesn't need to be like a hard piece of work, right? It can be like light and uplifting and fun, but understand that this is something that's worth you considering and actually given time in your day and your week and your month to explore. I have enjoyed having this conversation with you. I hope you have enjoyed it yourself. I'd love to know your feedback on this. I'd love to know what came up for you. Feel free to reach out to me over on Instagram at may.james_ or tag me on your stories or your thoughts in your posts. Maybe write a post about it or write a story and tell me what you're thinking. I love to kind of continue the conversation on. And I know that, you know, there's so much to this that we haven't even touched the surface of, but I hope that this has given you a really nice insight and some thought-provoking pointers for you to explore beyond this episode. I just want to say well done for listening if you got through that, and that this work of leadership and building your emotional intelligence is what makes you a top-notch business owner. This is what is the creme de la creme. This is what really gets people to the top. And yes, it might not be an overnight thing. Yes, it takes time, but it is going to serve you for the rest of your business career, for the rest of your life. This stuff is powerful. I will speak to you next week. Take care. I'm sending you tons of love, and I'll see you soon. Bye.